There are some things from childhood that we never completely forget. A particular song, a particular smell, and sometimes a particular name. For generations of Nigerian children, one name could end an argument, stop mischief, and send a child running indoors before sunset. OJUJU CALABAR. But who or what was OJUJU CALABAR? Was it a monster, a spirit, a person? Or was the frightening creature of our childhood actually the distorted memory of something much older? The threat was simple. Don't go there. Come inside. Stop misbehaving. And if the child refused, OJUJU CALABAR will come and get you. Nobody needed to explain who OJUJU was. In a child's imagination, that was the point. You didn't know what OJUJU looked like. You didn't know where he lived. You didn't know when he would appear. And that made him much more powerful. But there was one clue hidden inside the name: Calabar. Calabar was not simply another Nigerian city. For centuries, the Cross River region developed elaborate systems of ritual, kingship, secret societies, and masquerades. Among the Efik and neighboring peoples, masked performances could represent ancestors, spirits, and forces connected with the moral order of the community. And some of those masks were not designed to look beautiful. They were designed to command attention, to create distance, and sometimes to create fear. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. In parts of the Cross River region and neighboring southeastern communities, masquerade traditions were deeply connected to institutions of authority. One particularly important tradition was Ekpo, associated especially with the Ibibio and related peoples. Among the Efik, the Ekpe institution was also enormously significant. These were not simply entertainers wearing costumes. Masquerades could embody ancestral or spiritual authority. Some represented benevolent forces. Others represented dangerous or unsettled spirits. Their appearance could be deliberately grotesque, and their presence could reinforce the rules of society. Imagine being a child in a community where the appearance of a masquerade was not entertainment. Imagine seeing a figure whose identity was hidden, a distorted face, a massive costume, raffia moving as it walked, a crowd falling silent, and adults treating the figure with seriousness. To a child, the distinction between a masked human being and a supernatural being could become very thin. The masquerade wasn't necessarily supposed to be understood as an ordinary man wearing a costume. It represented something beyond the individual, something with authority. Colonial observers were fascinated and sometimes deeply disturbed by the masquerade traditions of old Calabar. Historical accounts describe masked figures with grotesque features and elaborate costumes. Some colonial writers interpreted these practices through their own religious worldview, describing them as mysterious or even demonic. We should be careful with those descriptions. They tell us as much about the colonial observer as they do about the culture being observed. But they nevertheless reveal something important. These masquerades were visually powerful. They were capable of commanding fear and respect. And here lies the connection that may explain the legend of OJUJU CALABAR. Traditional masquerade institutions were partly about social order. The message was simple: the community is watching. The ancestors are watching. There are consequences for breaking the rules. But as these traditions traveled beyond their original communities, something changed. The theology disappeared. The institutions disappeared. The history disappeared. What remained was the fear. Somewhere along the journey, the masquerade became a monster. Not necessarily a particular monster. Not a documented historical person. Not a single Calabar spirit. Rather, a Nigerian idea of a frightening masquerade. OJUJU came to be associated in popular Nigerian usage with a masquerade or frightening masked figure, and Calabar gave the creature its mysterious origin. The name travelled from community to city to generation, until children hundreds of kilometers away from Calabar were being warned about something called OJUJU CALABAR. And then something even more fascinating happened. OJUJU CALABAR entered the playground. Children began using the frightening figure in games of chase. One child became OJUJU, the others ran. Whoever was caught became the next OJUJU. The monster that parents had invented as a warning became a character in children's play. Fear became entertainment, and folklore became a game. So what exactly was OJUJU CALABAR? After searching through historical accounts, cultural studies, Nigerian folklore and oral recollections, there is an important conclusion. There is no convincing historical evidence that OJUJU CALABAR was one specific monster, king, spirit, or historical person. The evidence points somewhere else, toward the masquerade, toward the traditions of the Cross River region, toward Ekpo, toward Ekpe, and toward the way Nigerian society transformed an ancient cultural image into a modern children's legend. OJUJU CALABAR was probably never one creature, it was an idea. Perhaps that's why the legend survived, because every generation could give OJUJU a new face. For one child, he was a monster. For another, a masquerade. For another, a ghost story. And for millions of Nigerian children, he was simply the reason you came home before dark. Today, many of us laugh when we remember the fear. But behind that childhood memory is something much more interesting. A history of masquerades, ancestors, social authority, cross-river culture, and the remarkable way Nigerian folklore travels from one generation to another. Perhaps OJUJU CALABAR was never really a monster. Perhaps it was history, wearing a mask.